Hello everybody, in today's video, we'll be looking at gamo2's GITALLER controller. This is a $289 arcade controller for the arcade game Gitadora. Before we continue this video, I'll just put out a disclaimer that gamo2 sent me this review unit for free. But even though I received this for free, I won't let it impact my review, and I made sure to spend more time testing it thoroughly, unlike an old video I made a pretty big mistake on. Another warning is that I'm not good at Gitadora. I'm still essentially what a beginner is, so for me, it's tough to review it thoroughly. And so I got the help of my friend Approved DTX and his other Gitadora friends who are veterans at the game to test the controllers out. Approved DTX also made a review of GITALLER as well. He goes over the more technical aspects of the controller like in actual usage, firmware updates, and how to use the controller on DTX Mania and Gitadora PC, so I highly recommend anyone interested in this controller to check out his review. Mine is going to be a bit more shallow and like an introductory. Alright, now that's out of the way, let's talk about Gitadora. I'm sure most of you guys looking at this video looked at this controller and thought, hey, that's a controller for Guitar Hero, why is it so expensive? Well, it's not for Guitar Hero, it's for Gitadora. Gitadora is a Japanese arcade rhythm game made out of two other games, Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania. The original Guitar Freaks only had 3 frets, but it was soon updated to use 5 frets. Also, please don't tell me that Guitar Freaks copied Guitar Hero. Guitar Freaks came out before Guitar Hero did. Gitadora's gameplay is also pretty different from Guitar Hero. The track is flat and the notes are bar notes. It also has judgment windows, a thing that Guitar Hero doesn't have. And you also have to strum for every note. The game also originally started out using upscroll, but they eventually added downscroll years later. And it also has a gameplay mechanic called whale. Whaling is an either up or down movement depending on the whale note indicator on the screen. Basically, Gitadora and Guitar Hero are two completely different games and play really differently. They can't be compared to each other at all. But that's enough talk about Gitadora and Guitar Hero, let's talk about the controller. It comes in a pretty nice looking box. Unlike GITALLER, the contents in the box are straightforward. You have the controller, the guitar strap, an extra box of key switches, and the manual. The back of the guitar has a box compartment for the wires. Things like these are never really needed in controllers, but for a portable controller like GITALLER, I really appreciate it. The controller strap is actually the same kind they use in actual guitars, so if you ever want a replacement, a regular strap for guitars work too. The strum is extremely heavy and sturdy. It's so stiff and heavy that I wish it was lighter, but I'm sure it will wear out soon enough like the strum on the guitar controller on the Gitadora cabinet at my arcade. The fret buttons felt strangely tactile. The actual arcade buttons are linear, so it was kinda weird. Although the buttons were tactile, they were pretty light, which is a nice thing. When I decided to take the controller apart to take a look inside, it turns out that they were using Kale Box Brown key switches for their buttons, which is a pretty interesting choice. I didn't expect gamo2 to use keyboard switches in their controller, and let alone tactile key switches. And also, if you're wondering about what buttons are used in the actual arcade controller, they use custom Sanwa buttons. And I guess that gamo2 couldn't get their hands on them and had to use something else. The thing I don't understand is why gamo2 used Kale Box Brown switches. These switches are tactile, and they should have gone for something linear like Gatoron or Kale Red switches, so it would have been similar to the arcade button feel. And so I busted out my soldering iron and some spare Cherry MX Red switches. Also, the extra switches they included are Kale Gold switches, which are clicky switches. So I have no idea why they included that. It would have been nicer if they were linear switches, because not everyone has a soldering iron and spare linear switches lying around. So if their extra PCB component that they included used linear switches instead of Kale Gold clicky switches, it would have been so much better for most consumers. As for the strum, it's pretty stiff, but I hope it'll get looser over time like the arcade. The arcade strum is also a little stiff and requires force to move up and down, but not as stiff as this. Although, according to Approved DTX and his friends, the strum is constructed extremely similarly to the arcade, pretty much 1-to-1, and I wouldn't be surprised because my own Sound Vortex controller that they claim is arcade replica 1-to-1 really looks exactly the same as the knobs in my arcade. For an idea of how stiff the strum is for arcade and the GITALLER compared to other guitar controllers like let's say the Guitar Hero controllers, take a look at this. So yeah, it's pretty stiff. Unlike the arcade guitar, the insides of the guitar has iron weights in them. This is likely to keep the weighting throughout the guitar even and make it as heavy as arcade guitar. In total, the guitar weighs 2.5 kg. For arcade players, it's all about getting a controller as close to the arcade's controller as possible. Things like weight, size, and buttons are really important. The guitar is as close to arcade as it can get. Although personally, compared to the arcade, it felt like the guitar was a bit empty. The iron counterweights helped, but it still felt a bit hollow, especially from the hollowish sounds against the plastic when you press the fret buttons. To combat this, I stuffed my controller with foam. It helped a little, I guess, but it didn't make too much difference, to be honest. But overall, other than nitpicking on details like the sound and weight, the controller plays just like the arcade cabinet. I wasn't sure, so I asked Approved DTX and his friends about it, and they said it was basically arcade, even though the buttons were key switches instead of custom Sanwa buttons. buttons. Another thing is that Approved DTX and his friends actually have their own Gitadora guitar controllers ripped from the actual arcade cabinet. So these guitars that they brought over and lent me are exactly the same as the arcade. It is from the arcade machine, so I could compare the two guitars side by side. The shape of the guitars are extremely similar, although the actual guitars felt less hollow. Another thing to note is that the strap on the Gitalla is a lot smoother than the arcade cabinets, which can throw you off when you first get the guitar. Because the arcade doesn't use actual guitar straps, but their own version, which is pretty rough because of the material they use. The guitar is currently compatible with DTX Mania and Gitadora's PC Trial Edition. It should be compatible with the full release of the Gitadora PC version when it does come out. In the end, do I recommend it for $289? Well, if you are a hardcore Gitadora player, I think it's pretty worth it. And yes, it is extremely expensive, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people will find this pricing absolutely ridiculous. But for hardcore players, I think this is an alright price, especially compared to gamo2's other premium arcade replica controllers that sit way above $289. Also, Konami themselves has announced that they will be selling their own Gitadora controller. Their controller will be exactly the same as arcade apparently, according to them, using the same parts and etc. Which is different from Gitaller because, well, Gitaller's buttons use key switches and the one Konami uses are custom Sanwa buttons. However, Konami's guitar also costs 38,000 yen. It really goes to show how much arcade cabinets and their parts cost. It really isn't cheap at all. So in the end, I recommend gamo2's controller because it's the only one other than Konami's that works as well and is the cheapest. And yeah, that's it for my review. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested, please check the guitars out. And that's it. Okay, I can just see the comments in my mind asking me if this guitar can play Clone Hero. And it can, I guess. But it doesn't have the whammy bar, so you can't do whammies. But other than that, it works. The guitar has the tilt function. It has the 5 fret buttons and the strum bar. Although I personally wouldn't recommend it because of the strum. I imagine most Clone Hero players prefer a lighter strum. And this strum will be way too heavy. Just think of the guitars in the Guitar Hero arcade cabinets. I think that would be similar since Konami made both Guitar Hero arcade cabinets and Gitadora cabinets. So it's similar, I guess. Another thing to know is that the neck of the Gitaller is longer than Clone Hero guitars. And the buttons on Gitaller is smaller, so it's harder to press all the buttons at once on the Gitaller. And also the Gitaller's neck is thicker, so when you grab onto the neck area, your hand is pretty stretched out and it's very tiring pressing all the complex patterns on Clone Hero compared to Clone Hero guitar. So yeah, I don't really recommend this for Clone Hero. It'd be a huge waste of money if you got it for Clone Hero. You're really better off getting a Guitar Hero guitar for Clone Hero, and it's much more worth getting this guitar for Gitadora because it definitely will not overstrum, and it is what it's for. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.